June 1, 2026, began like any other morning in American television. The cameras were rolling, the headlines were ready, and viewers tuned in expecting the familiar faces they had welcomed into their homes for years. But something felt wrong. One seat inside the newsroom stood empty. Dana Perino was nowhere to be seen. There was no immediate explanation, no on-air statement, no dramatic announcement flashing across the screen. Just a silence that seemed impossible to ignore. And sometimes silence tells a story far more heartbreaking than words ever can. For years, Dana had built a reputation as someone who never backed away from pressure. She had faced reporters, politicians, and some of the toughest moments in public life with remarkable composure. Yet on this day, the woman who had spent decades delivering the news was suddenly absent from the place where millions expected to find her. Behind the bright studio lights and polished broadcasts, a private tragedy had unfolded. One so painful that no amount of experience, discipline, or professionalism could shield her from its impact. Only days earlier, life appeared to be moving in a completely different direction. Dana had proudly introduced her first novel, a project filled with optimism, heart, and her belief in the power of connection. Titled Purple State, the book represented a major personal achievement and a moment that should have been celebrated. Friends, colleagues, and supporters expected the coming weeks to be filled with excitement and congratulations. Instead, that joyful milestone was suddenly overshadowed by devastating heartbreak. The reason for her disappearance was one no daughter is ever prepared to face. Her beloved father, Leo Perino, had passed away. The quiet and dependable man from Colorado had been much more than a parent. He was the foundation beneath her success, the steady voice behind her confidence, and the person who first inspired her curiosity about the world. Long before television studios and national headlines became part of her life, it was Leo who encouraged a young girl growing up around Wyoming ranch country to pay attention, ask questions, and never stop learning. Now that guiding presence was gone, leaving behind a loss far deeper than anything viewers could see from the outside. Leo Perino was 79 years old. After spending decades working, providing, and showing up every single day, he had finally stepped away from the workforce. Retirement was supposed to mark the beginning of a slower chapter, a season of rest after a lifetime of responsibility. But fate had other plans. Less than a month after retiring, his journey came to an end. Before he could fully enjoy the freedom he had earned, he was gone. And perhaps that reality forces all of us to confront an uncomfortable question. What is the true cost of carrying strength for everyone around you while your own heart is quietly falling apart? How much pain can a person hide behind a calm face before the weight becomes unbearable? Today, we are not talking about Dana Perino, the television personality. We are not talking about the former White House press secretary or the successful author whose name millions recognize. Today, we are talking about Dana the daughter, Dana the wife, Dana the human being whose private struggles have remained hidden behind years of professionalism and public confidence. Because behind every polished appearance is a real person, and behind every smile is a story most people never see. This is not simply a story about death. It is a story about devotion, resilience, sacrifice, and the kind of heartbreak that arrives without warning. It is about the lessons passed from one generation to the next and the painful moment when the person who taught those lessons is no longer there to offer them. It is a reminder that titles, achievements, and public success do not make anyone immune to grief. Dana Marie Perino entered the world on May 9, 1972, in Evanston, Wyoming. She did not grow up surrounded by fame, influence, or luxury. Instead, she was raised in a place where open skies seemed endless and where hard work was simply part of everyday life. In those vast western landscapes, a young girl developed an endless curiosity about the world around her. While many people see a horizon and stop looking, Dana wanted to know what existed beyond it. Her childhood was spent between Wyoming and Colorado on a ranch shared with her parents, Leo and Jan, and her sister Angie. Life there was simple, but it was far from easy. Responsibilities came first. Work was expected. There were no shortcuts and no special treatment. It was the kind of environment that quietly builds resilience because challenges are not viewed as obstacles, they are viewed as part of life itself. At the center of that household stood Leo Perino. He was never interested in fame or recognition. He was not a political insider or a television personality. He was a hardworking man who believed deeply in staying informed and paying attention to the world beyond his own front door. News broadcasts were a regular presence in the home. Conversations carried meaning. Questions were encouraged. Curiosity was nurtured. For Leo, understanding the world was never optional. It was a responsibility. And that belief became one of the greatest gifts he ever passed on to his daughter. Dana has often credited her father for sparking her fascination with current events and public affairs. Long before television cameras, best-selling books, or national headlines entered her life, it was Leo who planted the idea that knowledge matters. Everything that followed can be traced back to those early lessons. The classrooms at Colorado State University, the demanding corridors of Capitol Hill, the high-pressure environment inside the White House, the bright lights of television news. Every chapter grew from a foundation built years earlier around family conversations and a father's encouragement. So when June 1, 2026 arrived and viewers noticed Dana's absence from America's newsroom, the empty chair represented far more than a missed appearance. It reflected a loss too painful for words. The silence inside that studio carried the weight of a daughter mourning the man who helped shape every success she would ever achieve. Some of the most important lessons in life never come from textbooks. They emerge during ordinary moments that seem insignificant at the time. A discussion around the dinner table. A question asked after the evening news. A parent encouraging a child to think more deeply about what they have seen and heard. Those moments rarely make headlines, yet they often define an entire future. That was the education Leo Perino gave his daughter. He never chased attention for himself, but he understood the importance of those who stood in positions of influence. He followed events closely because he believed informed citizens create stronger communities. More importantly, he listened. He challenged his daughters to think critically and form their own opinions. Through those conversations, he taught them a lesson many people spend a lifetime trying to learn. The world is worthy of your attention, and your attention has the power to change the world. When Dana attended Colorado State University Pueblo to study mass communications, she carried those values with her. She approached every class, every opportunity, and every challenge with a sense of purpose that had been cultivated years earlier at home. Learning was not simply about career advancement. It was about understanding people, institutions, and the forces that shape society. That commitment eventually led her to Washington, D.C., where she immersed herself in the inner workings of government. She witnessed firsthand how decisions were made, how policies affected lives, and how leadership functioned under pressure. Rather than observing from the sidelines, she absorbed every lesson available to her. Then came the opportunity that would define her public career. From 2007 through 2009, Dana Perino served as the 24th White House press secretary under President George W. Bush. She became only the second woman ever entrusted with that role. Day after day, she stood before cameras and reporters, answering difficult questions while representing one of the most scrutinized institutions in the world. It was a position that required extraordinary discipline. Every briefing carried enormous pressure. Every answer was analyzed. Every mistake risked becoming a headline. Yet through it all, Dana displayed remarkable composure. No matter how intense the situation became, she projected confidence and control. The responsibility demanded unwavering focus, especially during moments when the news itself felt overwhelming. The role demanded perfection. One mistake could become tomorrow's headline. One uncertain answer could trigger weeks of criticism. Every appearance required confidence, control, and the ability to stand in front of people searching desperately for a crack in the armor and leave them with nothing to find. For 2 intense years, Dana Perino carried that responsibility without publicly breaking. She has never hidden how difficult those years were. The pressure was relentless. The scrutiny never stopped. There were no off days, no room for weakness, no opportunity to disappear when life became overwhelming. Yet through every challenge, she relied on a lesson that had followed her since childhood. A lesson taught by a hard-working father who believed that character is revealed not when life is difficult, but by how you respond when it is. That belief became the invisible force behind everything Dana achieved. Long before television cameras followed her every move, long before reporters filled briefing rooms waiting for answers, she had already learned the value of discipline. She had learned that showing up matters, even when nobody notices. She had learned that integrity is not something performed for applause. It is something practiced when nobody is watching. Those lessons stayed with her through every major chapter of her life. When her time in the White House came to an end, Dana faced a question that challenges many public figures. What comes next? For some, leaving a position of national importance becomes the beginning of obscurity. For Dana, it became the beginning of an entirely new chapter. She entered television not as a celebrity seeking attention, but as someone with first-hand experience of how power operates behind closed doors. Viewers recognized that immediately. They saw authenticity. They saw credibility. Most importantly, they saw consistency. Over the years, she became one of the defining personalities at Fox News. Her appearances on The Five helped establish her as a trusted voice. Her role on America's Newsroom further strengthened that connection with audiences across the country. She authored successful books, participated in national conversations, and built a career based not on outrage or sensationalism, but on steadiness. In an era when many media personalities became famous for being loud, Dana became respected for being measured. That reputation made what happened in June of 2026 even more heartbreaking. Only days before tragedy struck, Dana had shared exciting news with her audience. She announced Purple State, her first novel. Unlike her previous books, this project carried a deeply personal significance. It was more than a professional accomplishment. It was a reflection of her beliefs about America, community, and the possibility that people with different perspectives can still find common ground. Friends and colleagues celebrated the announcement. Readers eagerly anticipated its release. Everything suggested that Dana was entering one of the most rewarding periods of her career. Then life changed without warning. The celebration was interrupted by devastating news that no daughter is ever prepared to hear. Her father, Leo Perino, had passed away suddenly. The excitement surrounding her book announcement felt distant. The interviews, the congratulations, the professional milestones, all of it became secondary. Because when someone who helped shape your entire identity disappears, the world does not feel the same. Leo was not simply a parent. He was the beginning of the story. He was the man who introduced his daughter to the importance of paying attention. The man who encouraged questions instead of easy answers. The man who believed that curiosity was one of life's most valuable qualities. Every success Dana achieved could be traced back to seeds planted during those early years at home. And now that foundation was gone. But what made the loss even more painful was the timing. After spending decades working, sacrificing, and providing for his family, Leo had finally retired. The chapter he had earned through years of dedication had finally arrived. For most people, retirement represents freedom. It represents the opportunity to enjoy the rewards of a lifetime of effort. It is the season people spend years imagining. The slower mornings, the relaxed schedules, the chance to enjoy family, hobbies, and simple moments without constant obligations. Leo reached that milestone. Then, almost immediately, everything ended. Less than 30 days after retiring, he was gone. That fact hit people with unusual force because it felt deeply unfair. Here was a man who had done everything right. He worked hard. He supported his family. He lived responsibly. He looked forward to a future he had earned. Yet that future lasted less than a month. The family chose not to reveal the specific cause of death. That privacy deserves respect. Some details belong only to those closest to the loss. But even without knowing every circumstance, the emotional impact remains unmistakable. Because grief is not always caused by what happened. Sometimes grief is intensified by what almost happened. The plans that were never completed. The experiences that never arrived. The moments that seemed guaranteed until suddenly they were not. That reality became painfully visible on June 1, 2026. Viewers tuning into America's Newsroom immediately noticed Dana's absence. For years she had been one of the program's most reliable and recognizable figures. Audiences had grown accustomed to seeing her there each morning. Her presence felt permanent. Her professionalism felt unwavering. Then suddenly, she wasn't there. No immediate explanation appeared. No detailed statement interrupted the broadcast. Only an empty chair. And that empty chair seemed to tell a story all by itself. Behind the scenes, Dana was facing something far more important than television. She was standing beside her family during one of the most difficult moments of their lives. Away from cameras, away from headlines, away from public expectations, she was doing what millions of people eventually must do, saying goodbye to someone they love. In those moments, titles lose their importance. Careers become background noise. Public achievements feel distant. What remains is family. What remains is memory. What remains is love. And for Dana Perino, the loss of Leo Perino was not simply the end of a life. It was the loss of the man whose influence touched every chapter of her own story. The man who unknowingly helped shape a future journalist, author, television anchor, and White House press secretary. The man whose lessons survived long after childhood ended. Now, as she faced life without him, one truth remained impossible to ignore. The world knew Dana Perino as a public figure. But before she was any of those things, she was simply Leo Perino's daughter. And that was the role that mattered most. For Dana Perino, this loss became another heavy chapter in a life already marked by responsibility, public pressure, and private grief.
It was not about fame or career anymore.
It was about a daughter facing the absence of the man who shaped her entire foundation. A father who worked his whole life, finally stepped into retirement, and never got the chance to enjoy it. The timing left a silence that words cannot fully fill. What remains is memory, influence, and the quiet impact he left behind in everything she became. If this story touched you, share your thoughts in the comments and tell us who you remember today.